She was trapped in a marriage with the most ruthless millionaire, yet she had no idea why. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us get back to our main character. Today's story is titled, She Was Trapped in a Marriage with the Most Ruthless Millionaire, Yet She Had No Idea. Why? Rain poured over downtown Manhattan, streaking silver lines across the windows of the tall glass buildings. Inside one of them, on the 52nd floor, the air felt colder than the weather outside. The clock on the wall ticked softly as Elena Parker sat across from a man whose name carried weight in every financial headline. Damian Blackwell, the youngest self-made millionaire in New York. He was known for his brilliance and his cruelty. His empire stretched across technology, media, and real estate. People said he never smiled unless someone was losing money. Elena's hands trembled as she clutched her worn leather purse. "Mr. Blackwell, I do not understand why I am here," she said quietly. Damian leaned back in his chair, eyes like polished steel. "You are here," he replied, "because I need a wife." Her breath caught. "Excuse me?" "Not in the romantic sense," he continued calmly. "This is a legal arrangement, a contract marriage. You will live in my residence, attend public events, and play the part. In return, every debt under your name will disappear." Informants. Elena blinked, unable to process his words. The rain against the windows grew louder, like a drumbeat of disbelief. "You do not even know me," she whispered. "I know enough," he said. "You are broke. Your mother is in a hospital that requires a down payment by Friday. Your landlord has already posted an eviction notice. I am offering you a way out." He opened a black folder and slid a document across the table. Her name was printed neatly on the first page. The ink shimmered under the cold light. "This is insane," Elena muttered. "Why would you choose me?" Damian's gaze stayed fixed on her. "Because I do not need love," he said evenly. "I need control. And you, Miss Parker, have no reason to disobey the terms of a contract that saves your life." For a moment, the room was completely silent. The hum of the city below faded. All that existed was the steady sound of her heartbeat and the smooth scratch of his pen as he signed his name first. He pushed the pen toward her. "If you sign this, your problems end tonight." Elena's throat tightened. Every instinct told her to run, but her mind replayed the hospital bills, the eviction notice, and the image of her mother's fragile hands. Her fingers hovered above the page. "If I do this, I lose my freedom." Damian's expression did not change. "No," he said softly, "you trade it for survival." Outside, thunder rolled over the city. The lights flickered for a split second, casting their shadows across the polished table. Elena stared at the contract again, at the elegant signature of the man who owned everything except a heart. Her pulse thundered as she picked up the pen. The ink bled smoothly onto the paper, sealing her fate. When she looked up, Damian was already standing. He buttoned his suit jacket and spoke without emotion. "Welcome to our arrangement, Mrs. Blackwell. My driver will take you home to prepare. The ceremony is at 6. Her voice barely escaped her lips. "Ceremony? A private signing at the courthouse," he replied. "It will be efficient." And just like that, he walked out, leaving her in the silence of the boardroom alone, stunned, and bound to a man whose reasons for marrying her remained a mystery. The rain kept falling over Manhattan, blurring the skyline like a veil, while somewhere high above the city, the most ruthless millionaire prepared for a marriage that was never meant to be real. The next morning, the gray New York sky hung low, heavy with fog and the smell of rain-soaked concrete. Elena Parker had barely slept. The black folder that Damian Blackwell had left on her kitchen table glinted under the dull light of dawn. Every word inside felt like a cage. 1 year, confidentiality, no personal attachments. Her mother's medical file sat beside it, the total due circled in red ink. Elena ran her fingers over the paper, her stomach twisting. She had spent her whole life fighting to keep her dignity, but now it felt like dignity was a luxury she could no longer afford. By 8:30, she stood in front of her cracked mirror, wearing her only pressed blouse and a skirt that had seen better days. She looked at herself for a long moment and whispered, "You are doing this for her." Then she picked up her coat and left for the Blackwell Tower. At 9:59, she stepped into the marble lobby, surrounded by people in tailored suits and quiet confidence. The receptionist barely glanced up from her computer. "Name? Elena Parker. Mr. Blackwell is expecting me." The woman typed, then looked up, her tone softening. "Top floor. Executive suite. Good luck." The elevator ride felt endless. The mirrored walls reflected her nervous breathing, her trembling hands. When the doors opened, a tall woman in a navy pencil skirt was waiting. "This way, Miss Parker." The hallway smelled faintly of cedar and money. When they reached the end, double glass doors opened into an office that looked more like an art museum. Damian Blackwell stood by the window, his reflection framed against the skyline. He turned as she entered, his expression unreadable. "You are early," he said. "I could not sleep," Elena answered softly. He nodded once. On his desk sat 2 copies of the contract, perfectly aligned, a gold pen resting between them. "Have you read everything carefully?" "Yes." "Then sign both copies." Her hands shook as she lifted the pen. The moment her name touched the paper, it felt like the air in the room shifted thick, final, irreversible. Damian reached for the documents and signed his own name in sharp, deliberate strokes. He closed the folder, his voice low. "Welcome to our arrangement, Mrs. Blackwell." The words echoed in her chest. She wanted to correct him, to say this was not real, but something in his tone made it impossible. He glanced at his watch. "The ceremony is at 6 this evening. My driver will pick you up at 5. You will be given appropriate attire." "Ceremony?" she repeated. "A private courthouse signing," he replied. "No guests, no press." When she left the building, the city noise hit her like a wave. Cars honked, the wind carried the smell of roasted chestnuts from a street cart, and she suddenly felt very small in a world that belonged entirely to him. At 5 o'clock sharp, a sleek black car waited outside her apartment. The driver, dressed in gray, held the door open without a word. Inside lay a garment bag and a handwritten note in precise, elegant script. "Wear this. Do not be late." Elena unfolded the dress, a simple white sheath, understated but expensive. She dressed in silence, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it. By 6, she stood under the dim lights of a quiet courthouse. The rain had started again, tapping softly against the tall windows. Damian was already there, immaculate in a charcoal suit, a silver tie pin catching the light. The officiant's voice broke the silence. "Do you, Damian Blackwell, take this woman, Elena Parker, to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Juan Biasetter was Lubao. "I do," he said evenly. "And do you, Elena Parker, take this man, Damian Blackwell, to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Her lips parted, but the words barely came out. "I do." The ceremony lasted less than 10 minutes. No flowers, no music, just ink, paper, and a silence so heavy it almost hurt. When it was over, Damian turned to her. "Congratulations, Mrs. Blackwell. From this moment, we are legally bound. My attorney will handle the documents. The car will take us to the residence." She stared at him, her voice trembling. "Do I at least get to know why?" He looked at her for a long second, then turned toward the door. In time. Outside, the night had fallen over Manhattan. The car glided through the wet streets, neon lights reflecting off puddles like fragments of another world. When they stopped, she saw it, the Blackwell estate, rising from the hillside like something out of a dream. Columns of white stone, endless glass walls, fountains whispering in the rain. Damian stepped out first. "Welcome home." Inside, the air smelled faintly of jasmine and polished wood. A housekeeper appeared, her steps silent on the marble floor. "This will be your room," Damian said, leading her up the staircase. "Mine is down the hall. We will maintain separate quarters. Dinner is at 7. Attendance is optional unless required for appearances." Elena nodded, unable to speak. When he left, the silence swallowed her. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the diamond ring on her finger, the symbol of a contract. Not love. The rain outside kept falling, steady and relentless, as if the city itself understood her confusion. Somewhere down the hall, Damian Blackwell closed his office door. For the first time that day, he allowed his composure to slip, his hand tightening around the edge of his desk. Because this marriage, this deal he had orchestrated with ruthless precision, was not just about control. It was about something far more dangerous, something he could not let her discover. The next morning, the gray New York sky hung low, heavy with fog and the smell of rain-soaked concrete. Elena Parker had barely slept. The black folder that Damian Blackwell had left on her kitchen table glinted under the dull light of dawn. Every word inside felt like a cage: 1 year, confidentiality, no personal attachments. Her mother's medical file sat beside it, the total due circled in red ink. Elena ran her fingers over the paper, her stomach twisting. She had spent her whole life fighting to keep her dignity, but now it felt like dignity was a luxury she could no longer afford. By 8:30, she stood in front of her cracked mirror, wearing her only pressed blouse and a skirt that had seen better days. She looked at herself for a long moment and whispered, "You are doing this for her." Then she picked up her coat and left for the Blackwell Tower. At 9:59, she stepped into the marble lobby, surrounded by people in tailored suits and quiet confidence. The receptionist barely glanced up from her computer. "Name? Elena Parker. Mr. Blackwell is expecting me." The woman typed, then looked up, her tone softening. "Top floor, executive suite. Good luck." The elevator ride felt endless. The mirrored walls reflected her nervous breathing, her trembling hands. When the doors opened, a tall woman in a navy pencil skirt was waiting. "This way, Miss Parker." The hallway smelled faintly of cedar and money. When they reached the end, double glass doors opened into an office that looked more like an art museum. Damian Blackwell stood by the window, his reflection framed against the skyline. He turned as she entered, his expression unreadable. "You are early," he said. "I could not sleep," Elena answered softly. He nodded once. On his desk sat 2 copies of the contract, perfectly aligned, a gold pen resting between them. "Have you read everything carefully?" "Yes." "Then sign both copies." Her hands shook as she lifted the pen. The moment her name touched the paper, it felt like the air in the room shifted thick, final, irreversible. Damian reached for the documents and signed his own name in sharp, deliberate strokes. He closed the folder, his voice low. "Welcome to our arrangement, Mrs. Blackwell." The words echoed in her chest. She wanted to correct him, to say this was not real, but something in his tone made it impossible. He glanced at his watch. "The ceremony is at 6 this evening. My driver will pick you up at 5. You will be given appropriate attire." "Ceremony," she repeated. "A private courthouse signing," he replied. "No guests, no press." When she left the building, the city noise hit her like a wave. Cars honked, the wind carried the smell of roasted chestnuts from a street cart, and she suddenly felt very small in a world that belonged entirely to him. At 5 o'clock sharp, a sleek black car waited outside her apartment. The driver, dressed in gray, held the door open without a word. Inside lay a garment bag and a handwritten note in precise, elegant script. "Wear this. Do not be late." Elena unfolded the dress, a simple white sheath, understated but expensive. She dressed in silence, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it. By 6, she stood under the dim lights of a quiet courthouse. The rain had started again, tapping softly against the tall windows. Damian was already there, immaculate in a charcoal suit, a silver tie pin catching the light. The officiant's voice broke the silence. "Do you, Damian Blackwell, take this woman, Elena Parker, to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," he said evenly. "And do you, Elena Parker, take this man, Damian Blackwell, to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Her lips parted, but the words barely came out. "I do." The ceremony lasted less than 10 minutes. No flowers, no music, just ink, paper, and a silence so heavy it almost hurt. When it was over, Damian turned to her. "Congratulations, Mrs. Blackwell. From this moment, we are legally bound. My attorney will handle the documents. The car will take us to the residence." She stared at him, her voice trembling. "Do I at least get to know why?" He looked at her for a long second, then turned toward the door. In time. Outside, the night had fallen over Manhattan. The car glided through the wet streets, neon lights reflecting off puddles like fragments of another world. When they stopped, she saw it. The Blackwell estate, rising from the hillside like something out of a dream. Columns of white stone, endless glass walls, fountains whispering in the rain. Damian stepped out first. "Welcome home." Inside, the air smelled faintly of jasmine and polished wood. A housekeeper appeared, her steps silent on the marble floor. "This will be your room," Damian said, leading her up the staircase. "Mine is down the hall. We will maintain separate quarters. Dinner is at 7. Attendance is optional unless required for appearances." Elena nodded, unable to speak. When he left, the silence swallowed her. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the diamond ring on her finger, the symbol of a contract, not love. The rain outside kept falling, steady and relentless, as if the city itself understood her confusion. Somewhere down the hall, Damian Blackwell closed his office door. For the first time that day, he allowed his composure to slip, his hand tightening around the edge of his desk. Because this marriage, this deal he had orchestrated with ruthless precision, was not just about control, it was about something far more dangerous, something he could not let her discover. Days passed like slow-moving clouds over the Blackwell estate. The mansion was vast and quiet, filled with echoing hallways and the faint tick of antique clocks. Elena Parker moved through it like a ghost, her footsteps soft against the marble floors. Every morning, she woke before dawn, brewed her own coffee, and tried to stay invisible. Damian Blackwell was rarely home. His days began before sunrise and ended long after midnight. The staff spoke of him with hushed respect, describing a man who built an empire by never letting anyone get too close. Elena saw that truth every evening at dinner. They sat across from each other at a long dining table that could seat 20, speaking only when necessary. "How was your day?" she asked one night, her tone polite but distant. He did not look up from his phone. "Productive." The silence stretched. The sound of silverware against porcelain filled the space between them. Elena forced a small smile. "You work too much." Damian's eyes flicked up for a moment, unreadable. "Work is simpler than people." She did not reply. She had learned that when he spoke, it was not an invitation to continue the conversation. After dinner, she wandered through the garden that wrapped around the back of the mansion. The air smelled of rain and roses. She stood under the awning, looking at the city lights in the distance. Somewhere out there, her mother was still in the hospital, unaware that her daughter had traded her freedom for a chance to save her. Every week, Damian's accountant delivered a sealed envelope to her room. Inside was proof that the hospital bills were being paid in full. He kept his promise, but the silence between them grew heavier with each passing day. One evening, as she walked through the grand hall, she noticed a door slightly ajar. From inside came the faint sound of a piano. She hesitated, then pushed it open. Damian sat at the instrument, his sleeves rolled up, the usual coldness in his face replaced by something distant, almost human. He looked up, startled. "You should not be in here." "I did not know you played," she said softly. "I do not," he replied, standing quickly. "It helps me think." Elena's gaze shifted to the framed photo on the piano. A younger Damian stood beside an older man, both smiling genuinely. "Your father?" she asked. His jaw tightened. "He died 12 years ago. That is enough for tonight." He brushed past her, the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the air. Later in her room, Elena sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the rain streaking down the window. She was beginning to see cracks in the armor of the man she had married. He was not heartless, just buried under something heavy and painful. The next morning, she found a note slipped under her door in his precise handwriting. "You will accompany me to a charity gala tonight. Formal attire required. Do not be late." That evening, the mansion buzzed with quiet preparation. Stylists arrived, dresses were delivered, and a car waited in the driveway. Elena stepped out wearing a black gown that shimmered under the soft lights. When Damian saw her, something flickered in his eyes, a brief moment of surprise before the mask returned. "You look acceptable," he said curtly, offering his arm. The gala was held at the Waldorf Hotel, under chandeliers that looked like frozen stars. Cameras flashed as they entered. Damian's hand rested lightly on her back, guiding her through the crowd, every gesture perfectly measured. For the world, they looked like a couple deeply in love. For Elena, it was a performance. But when a group of executives approached, she noticed the slight tremor in Damian's hand, the forced calm in his smile. He leaned close, his voice barely above a whisper. "Stay by my side, no matter what happens." Something in his tone sent a chill down her spine. She did not know it yet, but the reason behind their marriage, the secret that kept Damian's heart locked in stone, was about to surface, and it would change everything she thought she knew about him. The ballroom shimmered with golden light, a sea of tailored suits and glittering gowns. Elena Parker followed Damian Blackwell through the crowd. Her arm looped around his, her heartbeat steady only because she forced it to be. The cameras flashed relentlessly, every movement captured, every smile dissected. To the outside world, they were the perfect couple, elegant, powerful, untouchable. Mr. Blackwell, a man in a tuxedo, called out, his grin too wide to be sincere. It has been too long, and this must be your lovely wife. Damian nodded curtly. Elena, this is Charles Grant, one of our investors. Charles extended his hand, but his eyes carried a glint of mockery. So you are the mysterious woman who finally got the great Damian Blackwell to settle down. You must be extraordinary. Elena forced a polite smile. I would not say that. Charles chuckled. Of course. One does not have to be extraordinary when luck is on their side. The insult stung, but before Elena could respond, Damian's hand tightened around hers. His voice was low but sharp as glass. Careful, Charles. Luck can run out faster than you think. The man's smirk faded. Of course, my apologies. He disappeared into the crowd. Elena looked up at Damian, surprised by the edge in his tone. You did not have to defend me. I did not do it for you, he replied. I do not tolerate disrespect, especially in public. Still, something in his eyes contradicted his words. For a brief moment, she saw the faintest flicker of emotion, concern, maybe even guilt, but it vanished as quickly as it came. Hours passed. The speeches dragged on, champagne glasses clinked, and photographers circled like vultures. Elena slipped away to the balcony for air. The city lights glittered below, endless and alive. For the first time that night, she could breathe. She was lost in thought when she heard footsteps behind her. You should not wander off alone, Damian said quietly. I needed air, she replied without turning. It is suffocating in there. He joined her at the railing, his hands resting on the cold marble edge. These events are necessary. Appearances are currency in this world. Lever by tune. Maybe that is why everyone looks so poor, she said softly. His lips curved slightly, almost a smile. You are not as naive as I thought. I am not naive, Damian. I just refuse to believe that everything has to be a transaction. He looked at her then, really looked at her. The sharpness in his face softened. And yet you signed one. The words hit harder than he intended. Elena turned away, her voice quiet. I signed to save my mother, not to sell myself. Silence settled between them, heavy and unspoken. The rain had stopped, leaving the air cool and sharp. Below them, the city hummed. When they returned to the ballroom, whispers had started. Reporters exchanged glances, phones flashed, and Damian's assistant rushed toward him with a nervous expression. Sir, you need to see this, she whispered, handing him a tablet. His jaw tightened as he scrolled through the screen. What is it? Elena asked. He hesitated before showing her. Across the news feed was a headline that made her blood run cold. Anonymous source claims Blackwell marriage is a contractual deal. The photo beneath it was from their courthouse ceremony. The exact papers she had signed lay visible on the table. Elena's breath caught. How did they get that? Damian's expression darkened. Someone leaked it, and whoever did will regret it. The crowd began to buzz with speculation, journalists whispering her name. Elena felt the walls closing in. The flash of cameras burned her vision. She turned to him, desperate. You said this would stay private. His voice was low, strained. It was supposed to. Supposed to? She repeated, her voice shaking. Do you realize what they will say about me? Before he could answer, a reporter called out from the crowd. Mrs. Blackwell, is it true your marriage is fake? The question sliced through the air. Damian's face hardened, but before he could speak, Elena did something neither of them expected. She stepped forward, her voice steady even as her heart raced. This marriage may have started as a contract, she said, but that does not make it a lie. Gasps rippled through the room. Damian stared at her, stunned. And for the first time since they had met, something real flickered between them. Something even the ruthless could not hide. The ballroom froze in silence. Every eye turned toward Elena Parker, the woman who had just spoken against the storm of scandal. Cameras flashed in a frenzy. Reporters shouted questions. And for a long moment, Damian Blackwell did not move. His jaw clenched, his eyes locked on her like he was seeing her for the first time. Security escorted them out through a side corridor as the noise erupted behind them. In the car, neither spoke. The silence between them was not cold this time. It was heavy, charged with something raw and unspoken. Rain hit the windows in steady waves as the city lights blurred past. Finally, Elena broke the silence. "You knew this could happen, did you not?" Damian's voice was low. "I took every precaution. Someone wanted this to get out." "Someone inside your company?" she asked. "Possibly," he said, his tone clipped. "But it does not matter. I will handle it." She looked out the window. "You cannot fix everything with control, Damian." He turned to her sharply. "Control is the only thing that has ever kept my world from falling apart." She did not answer, but the exhaustion in her eyes spoke louder than words. When they arrived back at the mansion, the staff had already seen the news. Their glances were polite, but their silence felt heavy with judgment. Elena walked upstairs to her room without another word. For the first time since she had arrived, the mansion felt truly cold. She closed the door, leaned against it, and took a deep breath. Her phone buzzed. Dozens of messages lit up the screen, headlines, gossip, strangers calling her a gold digger, a liar, a fraud. She scrolled once, then set the phone down with trembling hands. Downstairs, Damian stood in his study, staring at the article on his screen. Beneath the headline was a photograph of Elena standing beside him on the balcony earlier that night. The way she had looked at him, calm, unafraid, cut deeper than any accusation. His assistant entered quietly. "Sir, the board wants an emergency meeting in the morning. They are calling this a crisis of image." He did not look away from the screen. "Cancel it." "Sir, videos sebdatal god plago. Konzer. In they wise and hen bis." "I said cancel it. I have something else to take care of first." The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. Elena walked into the kitchen, her eyes tired but steady. She found Damian there, already dressed, coffee in hand. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "You handled yourself well last night." She gave a small, weary smile. "I was just telling the truth." He nodded slowly. "You should not have had to. I failed to protect you." She frowned. "Protect me from what, Damian?" "The truth?" He met her gaze, and for the first time, the cold precision in his voice cracked. "From the people who would use it to destroy you. The leak came from my office. Someone close to me did this to hurt us both." Elena's eyes widened. "Then why did you marry me? Really?" He exhaled, setting the cup down. "Because I needed a name to stop a hostile takeover. But I chose you because you had nothing to gain from my world and nothing to lose by walking away." Her chest tightened. "So it was all business." "It was," he said, then paused. At first, the room went still. She could not tell if he was confessing or apologizing, but the truth in his eyes was undeniable. Before she could speak, his phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, his expression darkening. "They are threatening to release more private records if I do not step down as CEO." Elena's voice was calm. "Then step down." He stared at her, surprised. "You think I can give up everything I built?" She met his gaze steadily. "If everything you built costs you your integrity, then it was never worth keeping." For the first time, Damian had no answer. He looked at her, this woman he had forced into a lie, and realized she was the only honest thing left in his life. Outside, the storm had finally cleared, but inside, something else had begun to shift. The ruthless millionaire who once believed control was everything had just met someone he could not control. Someone who might finally teach him what love truly meant. The next few days blurred into a storm of headlines and phone calls. Damian Blackwell barely slept. Every network, every newspaper, every gossip page had turned their cameras toward him. Words like fraud, deception, and sham marriage filled the air like smoke. Inside the mansion, the tension was suffocating. Elena Parker kept to herself, spending most of her time in the library. She read the same page over and over, but none of the words stayed in her mind. Every time her phone buzzed, she flinched. Strangers sent hate messages, tabloids camped outside the gates, and reporters shouted questions through the iron fence. On the third night, Damian came home long after midnight. His tie was gone, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, his face drawn from exhaustion. He stood in the doorway of the library, silent for a moment before saying quietly, "You should not read those things." Elena looked up from the couch. "They are about me, Damian. Pretending they are not does not make them disappear." He crossed the room and sat across from her. "This is my fault. I brought you into this." She shook her head. You did not make me sign that contract. I chose this. His voice hardened. You chose to save your mother, not to be humiliated in front of the entire city. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. The rain beat against the windows like a ticking clock, counting down something inevitable. Finally, she said softly, you can end this. Tell them the truth. His eyes darkened. And admit that I used you? She met his gaze without flinching. Admit that you are human. The words cut deeper than any insult. Damian leaned back, silent. He had spent his entire life building walls, contracts, companies, control. Now, one woman's honesty had dismantled them faster than any scandal could. The next morning, he stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his cufflinks. But this time, he did not reach for his usual armor of arrogance. He looked tired, almost haunted. When his assistant called to remind him of the emergency board meeting, he said simply, tell them I am coming in person. By 9 o'clock, the conference room of Blackwell Holdings was filled with executives, attorneys, and shareholders. Cameras were forbidden, but rumors had already spread that Damian was about to resign. He entered the room in silence, every eye turning toward him. Without a word, he placed a folder on the table and said, the rumors are true. The marriage began as a contract. It was a mistake, mine. Murmurs broke out, but he raised a hand to quiet them. Elena Parker had no part in this arrangement, beyond what I forced upon her. She never asked for money, power, or fame. She only asked for honesty, something I failed to give. An older board member frowned. Mr. Blackwell, you understand that this confession could cost you the company. Damian nodded. Then let it cost me. For the first time in his life, he felt light. The weight that had been crushing him since his father's death, since every deal he had made to protect his empire, seemed to fall away. When he walked out of that room, the reporters waiting outside were ready with questions. Microphones thrust toward him, flashes blinding his eyes. He paused, scanning the crowd until he saw her Elena standing just beyond the line of security guards. He walked straight to her. The crowd roared, but neither of them heard a sound. Elena, he said, his voice steady but raw. I told them everything. No more contracts. No more lies. Her eyes glistened with disbelief. You did that? For me? He shook his head. Not for you. For the truth. For what I should have been from the beginning. Reporters shouted questions, but Damian ignored them. You once said I could not fix everything with control. You were right. I cannot control this, but I can choose to stop pretending. Elena's lips parted, her voice trembling. What happens now? I lose the company, he said quietly, but I win back the only thing that still matters. He reached for her hand, not caring who saw. The cameras flashed like lightning. Somewhere in that chaos, something shifted the story of the ruthless millionaire, and his contract bride was no longer a scandal. It had become something else entirely. That evening, back at the mansion, the world outside still buzzed with news, but the air inside was calm. Damian stood by the window, watching the last light fade over the city. Elena joined him, her steps soft. They will not forgive easily, she said. He nodded. They do not have to. I did not do it for forgiveness. She looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. Then why? He turned to her, and for the first time, there was no arrogance, no walls, just truth. Because I finally understood what my father meant when he said power means nothing if you cannot look someone in the eyes and say you did the right thing. Elena smiled faintly. He would have been proud. Damian's voice softened. Maybe, but I think you are the one who should be proud. You were never the one who needed saving, Elena. I was. Outside, the city lights flickered against the night sky. Inside, the man once known as the coldest millionaire took a deep breath, feeling something unfamiliar peace. And for the first time in his life, Damian Blackwell was free, not because he had control, but because he had finally let it go. The following morning, the headlines exploded again, but this time, the tone was different. Blackwell steps down to protect wife. From contract to confession. The redemption of a ruthless millionaire. The story that once painted Elena Parker as a fraud had shifted. Now the world wanted to know why a man like Damian Blackwell would give up an empire for her. Elena stood by the window of the mansion, sunlight spilling across the marble floor. Her phone buzzed non-stop with messages from journalists and strangers alike, some apologizing, others still skeptical. But she ignored them all. She had spent months feeling powerless, and for the first time, she no longer felt afraid. Downstairs, the sound of footsteps echoed. Damian entered the room, dressed simply in a gray sweater and slacks instead of his usual tailored suits. There was something different about him. The sharp edge in his posture was gone. He looked human. "You should not be here," she said softly. "The reporters are waiting outside." "I know," he replied. "Let them wait." He approached the table and set down a small envelope. "This is for you. Your mother's hospital account is fully covered for the next year. I made sure of it before I left the company." Elena blinked back tears. "Damian, you did not have to." "I did," he said firmly. "It was the only promise I ever meant to keep." The silence between them was gentle this time, not cold. She could see the exhaustion in his eyes, but also peace. A kind of quiet surrender she had never thought possible for him. "What will you do now?" she asked. He gave a faint, ironic smile. "Something I have never done before." "What is that?" "Live." For a moment she almost laughed. "You make it sound simple." "Maybe it is," he said. "Maybe I just made it complicated." The doorbell rang suddenly, breaking the stillness. Through the window, Elena saw a crowd gathering at the gates, reporters, photographers, and camera crews. The world had come to hear the man who once ruled it. Damian turned toward the noise, then back to her. "They will not stop until I speak, and when I do, I want you to stand beside me." Her eyes widened. "You want me to face them with you?" "It's all bizarre. I want them to see the truth, not the version they invented. The truth that I was the one who hid behind lies, and you were the one who showed me what honesty costs." Elena hesitated, then nodded slowly. "If I stand there with you, we face it together. No more contracts, no more pretending." "No more pretending," he agreed quietly. An hour later, they stood side by side on the front steps of the Blackwell estate. Microphones filled the air, cameras clicked like thunder. The world waited. Damian stepped forward first. "I made mistakes," he said clearly. "I built a life out of control and forgot how to be human. But this woman," he paused, glancing at Elena, "showed me that love does not come from power. It comes from truth." The crowd murmured, flashes blinding them both. Reporters shouted questions, but Damian only took Elena's hand. "I will not answer rumors. I will only say this. The contract is over. What remains is real." The words spread across the world within hours. By nightfall, every major outlet replayed the clip of him holding her hand. Back inside, Elena sat on the couch, still in disbelief. "You just gave the entire world our story," she said quietly. Damian smiled faintly. "Let them have it. I am done hiding." For the first time, she saw him not as the ruthless millionaire who had trapped her in a deal, but as a man who had finally learned to let go. Outside, the noise of the press faded. Inside, the silence was soft and warm. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Damian reached for her hand again, his voice low, steady. "Elena, this time, if I ask you to stay, it will not be part of a contract." She looked at him, her eyes glistening. "Then ask me," he smiled gently. "Stay." And for the first time, she did not hesitate. The days that followed felt different. For the first time since she had entered the mansion, Elena Parker woke to silence that did not feel heavy. The storm outside had passed, and the storm inside their lives had finally begun to clear. The media still whispered, but their tone had softened. The world no longer saw her as a scandal. They saw a story of redemption. Downstairs, Damian Blackwell sat by the piano in the living room, the same one she had found him playing weeks ago. His fingers moved slowly across the keys, uncertain but genuine. The melody was quiet, broken, but real. Elena stood in the doorway listening. "You are getting better," she said softly. He looked up, smiling faintly. "I had a good teacher. You taught me that doing something imperfectly is better than not trying at all." She crossed the room and sat beside him. "You taught me that even the most ruthless man can change if he chooses to." He exhaled, his expression softening. "I never expected forgiveness." "It was never about forgiveness," she replied. "It was about truth." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet between them was peaceful now, not forced. A knock sounded at the door, and the housekeeper entered, handing Damian a thick envelope. "This just arrived from the board, sir." He took it, glanced at the logo, and smiled. "They are offering me the position back." Elena's eyes widened. "And what will you do?" He looked at her, then set the envelope aside without opening it. I already made my choice. You are really going to walk away from it all? She asked softly. He nodded. Yes. I have spent years building an empire that never gave me peace. Now I would rather build something that does. She smiled gently. And what would that be? He reached for her hand. A life that is real. Outside, sunlight spilled across the terrace. The city that once felt like a cage now looked alive and endless. That evening, they took a walk through Central Park. Just two faces in a crowd. No cameras, no headlines, no pretense. Damian carried a paper cup of coffee in one hand and held her hand with the other. The cold air stung, but it felt good, honest, grounding. Do you ever think about how it all began? Elena asked quietly. Every day, he admitted. The night I made you sign that contract, I thought I was protecting myself. But the truth is, I was running from everything I had become. She glanced at him, her eyes soft. And now? Now I am done running. They reached a quiet bridge overlooking the frozen lake. The world seemed still, suspended in the golden light of the setting sun. Damian turned to her, pulling something from his coat pocket. It was the ring, the same one she had worn during the fake ceremony. I kept this, he said. Not because of what it meant back then, but because I hoped one day it could mean something real. Her breath caught as he knelt before her, his voice steady and warm. Elena Parker, there are no contracts this time, no conditions. Just a question, will you stay? Not because you have to, but because you want to? Tears filled her eyes. She smiled through them, her heart full. Yes, Damian. This time I stay because I want to. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and the crowd around them, unaware of their story, simply smiled at the sight of two strangers in love. As the last light of day faded, Damian whispered, It started as a deal, but you turned it into a promise. Elena leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. And this time, she said softly, it is one we both intend to keep. The city lights shimmered in the distance, the wind carrying the faint echo of laughter and piano notes. The ruthless millionaire was gone, and in his place stood a man who had finally learned what power could never give him: peace, love, and the courage to be real. The following spring arrived quietly. The city had thawed, and Central Park bloomed with life again. The scandal that once consumed every headline had faded into history, replaced by newer stories, newer faces. But for Elena Parker and Damian Blackwell, peace was no longer a dream, it was their daily reality. The morning sunlight filtered through the wide glass windows of their apartment overlooking the river. The mansion had been sold months ago, and with it, the weight of Damian's old life. Their new home was smaller, simpler, filled not with servants or silence, but with warmth. The smell of coffee drifted through the air as Elena moved around the kitchen, humming softly to the sound of an old jazz record. Damian walked in, still adjusting his sleeves. You are humming, he said with a teasing smile. That is a good sign. She glanced over her shoulder. That means I am happy. He stepped closer, wrapping his arms around her waist. That makes two of us. For a moment, the world outside disappeared. The once ruthless millionaire who had lived on control and precision now stood barefoot in a sunlit kitchen, holding the woman who had taught him how to be human again. After breakfast, they walked to the park, hand in hand. Children chased pigeons near the fountain, and an old street musician played a familiar tune on the piano, soft, imperfect, and beautiful. Damian stopped, recognizing the melody. It was the same piece he had played on sleepless nights, the one she had heard through the open door of his study months ago. Elena smiled, realizing it too. He plays it better than you, she teased. He laughed quietly. Everyone does. Then his expression softened. But I like this version more. It feels alive. They sat on a nearby bench, watching the world move around them. For once, neither of them needed to say anything. The silence between them no longer carried distance, it carried peace. After a while, Damian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded paper. I found this while cleaning yesterday, he said. Do you remember? Elena unfolded it carefully. It was the original marriage contract, the one that had started it all. The pages were worn, creased, and faintly yellowed at the edges. She traced her name on the signature line, her heart swelling with the memory of that frightened woman who had once signed her life away. What do we do with it? She asked softly. He took the paper from her hands and smiled. We finish what we started. He tore the document neatly in half. The sound was quiet but powerful, like the closing of a door they no longer needed to walk through. The pieces fluttered into a nearby trash bin, carried for a moment by the spring wind. Elena looked at him, her eyes warm. That was symbolic. That was necessary, Damian replied. It is time we stop being who we were and start being who we are. As they stood to leave, a little boy ran past and dropped a red balloon. It rolled to Damian's feet. He bent down, picked it up, and handed it back to the boy with a smile. The child's mother thanked him softly, and Damian nodded, a gesture small yet full of grace. When Elena took his hand again, she whispered, "You have changed." He glanced down at her, smiling faintly. "No, I finally became the man I was supposed to be." They walked home as the afternoon sun began to fade. The city bathed in gold. The wind carried the scent of blossoms, and somewhere behind them, the piano tune lingered in the air like a promise kept. That night, as the lights of Manhattan flickered across the water, Damian poured 2 glasses of wine and looked at Elena. "You once told me that love cannot be written in contracts," he said. "You were right." Elena smiled, touching her glass to his. "And you taught me that even the coldest heart can learn to feel again." They clinked glasses, the soft sound echoing through the quiet room. For a long time, they stood by the window, watching the city breathe. It had begun as a lie, but it ended in truth. A story of 2 people who found love not through perfection, but through forgiveness. And as the stars reflected over the Hudson, one thing was certain. The contract was gone, but the promise, the real one, was forever.